Okay, so fitness trackers, right. I feel like everyone's least curious about these things.
Yeah, definitely a hot topic these
For
days.
sure. Like we've all seen the ads, the influencers, the whole shebang.
Promising you'll walk more, sleep better, maybe even magically become a morning person.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
slap on this wristband and bam, you're basically an Olympian, right?
Right. But the big question is, do they really live up to the hype? Or is it all just, clever marketing?
That's what we're going to unpack today.
Love it.
We're diving deep into a study with the very straightforward title, an analytical study of use and effects of fitness tracker on humans.
Gets right to the point. I like it.
Right. No beating around the bush here. So this study, they wanted to see what actually happens when real people start using these things.
Exactly. They got 31 people involved, men and women, different ages, jobs, all that, to get a realistic picture.
Makes sense. You got to have a good mix.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets cool. Some folks were rocking fitness bands, the classic
Yeah.
wristbands, while others just used apps on their phones.
Which, let's be real, our phones are practically glued to us anyway. Might as well track some steps while we're at it.
Right. Exactly. But the study didn't just look at if people used the trackers, they dug into how people use them.
Oh, interesting. So, like, were they just glancing at their step count, or were they really digging into the data?
Exactly. Were they setting goals, obsessing over every calorie, the whole 9 yards?
Okay, so the big question is, did all this tracking actually lead to any positive changes? Like, were people actually getting healthier?
That's the million-dollar question. And to figure that out, they didn't just ask people how they felt. They actually measured stuff like sleep patterns, how much people were moving, even heart rate variability.
So they weren't messing around. This wasn't just like, oh, yeah, I feel fitter. They wanted proof.
Exactly. Real data, real results.
Okay, I'm hooked. But before we get into those results, tell me about the people in the study. Were they all already gym rats? Because that wouldn't be a fair comparison, right?
That's a great question. And no, it was a good mix of folks, actually. Some were already hitting the gym regularly, while others were just, starting to think about getting more active.
Interesting. So it's like a cross-section of everyday people.
Exactly. People like our listeners who are curious about these trackers and whether they could actually make a difference.
Love it. Okay, so we've got our participants, mix of fitness levels, all hooked up to their trackers. What happened next? Spill the tea.
Well, get this. The most popular app among the participants was, drumroll, Google Fit.
Really? Google Fit, I wouldn't have guessed that.
I know, right? You'd think it'd be some fancy app with all the bells and whistles.
Right. But nope, good old Google Fit was the front runner. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. Maybe it's the simplicity, or maybe just that it's already on so many Android phones, easy access.
True, true. Okay, so Google Fit was the app of choice. What else? Did people even stick with it? Because we all know how easy it is to get excited about a new gadget, and then
Yeah.
I know that feeling all too well. But here's the thing. 71% of the participants stuck with their chosen tracker for over 3 months. Wow, that's impressive. That's like way past New Year's resolution territory.
Right. This wasn't just a fleeting fad. People were in it for the long haul.
So what was it about the trackers that kept them engaged? What was the magic sauce?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. It seems like having that data, that concrete feedback on their progress, even if it was just a tiny improvement, it was surprisingly motivating for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, it's almost like a game, right? Hitting those targets, leveling up your step count.
Exactly. And our brains are wired to love that kind of reward system. Even small victories trigger that dopamine hit.
Right, that little burst of like, hey, I did a thing.
Exactly. And over time, those little wins can add up to some pretty big changes.
Okay, so it's not just about the data itself, but how it makes us feel. Like more motivated, more in control.
You got it. And, for a lot of people, that sense of control can actually lead to a reduction in stress.
Wait, really? I would have think all those numbers, all that tracking would make you more stressed. Like, oh no, I'm 500 steps behind schedule.
It's funny you should say that because that's a common misconception. People think, oh, more data, more stress. But actually, the study found that a lot of folks felt less stressed about their health when they were tracking it.
Huh. That's really interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, think about it. When we don't have concrete information, it's easy to get stuck in our heads, right? We worry about whether we're doing enough, if we're making progress. But when you have that data, it's like, okay, here's where I'm at. No more guessing games.
Right. So instead of stressing about the unknown, you're like, okay, I see the problem. Now I can actually do something about it.
Exactly. It brings a sense of clarity and agency to your health journey. It's like, I'm in the driver's seat now.
I like that. But of course, too much of anything can be a bad thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
I imagine there's a point where tracking every little thing could become unhealthy.
Oh, absolutely. And the study does touch on that. For some people, fixating on every calorie, every step, it can actually lead to more anxiety, maybe even disordered eating habits in extreme cases.
So it's all about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Using the data as a tool, not letting it become an obsession.
Exactly. And that's something we should all be mindful of, whether we're using fitness trackers or just, navigating life in general.
So true. Okay, so data can be motivating, but too much data can be overwhelming. What else did we learn from this study? Any other big takeaways?
Well, one thing that stood out to me was that it's not just about the quantity of the data, but the quality,
Hmm.
It's not enough to just passively track stuff. You have to actually engage with the information.
Oh, I see. Like, just knowing you got 8 hours of sleep doesn't really tell you anything if you woke up feeling like you got hit by a truck.
Exactly. It's about connecting the dots between the data and how you're actually feeling. So if your tracker says you're killing it in the sleep department, but you're dragging yourself through the day, maybe it's time to dig a little deeper.
Right, like maybe your sleep quality isn't so great, even if the quantity is there.
Exactly. And that's where that mindfulness piece comes in again, right? Paying attention to your body, your energy levels, and using the data as a starting point for self-discovery.
I love that. It's like these trackers, they can give us clues, but ultimately we're the detectives of our own well-being.
Love that analogy. And speaking of clues and detectives, this study focused mainly on physical health, right? But it got me thinking, it's like all this tech, we've been focused on tracking our bodies, right? Steps, sleep, all that.
Right. Like fitness trackers are almost old news now. Everyone's got one.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder, what if we could apply that same trapping power to our minds?
Ooh, okay, now you're speaking my language. Like instead of tracking steps, we're tracking moods,
You're
stress levels.
Exactly. Imagine like an app that analyzes your voice when you're talking, See if you're stressed out just by how you're talking.
Okay, that's a little freaky, I gotta be honest. Like, is my phone gonna tell me to chill out?
Uh-huh. Maybe. But think about the possibilities. What if it could pick up on those subtle signs of burnout before you even realize you're feeling fried?
Okay, that would be kind of cool, actually. Like getting a heads up before I turn into a stress monster.
Right. Or imagine if it could track your sleep, not just how long you're sleeping, but like how restful your sleep actually is.
Okay, yeah, that's something I definitely need help with. But how accurate could that even be? Tracking our minds just seems so, I don't know, intangible.
It's definitely a newer frontier, but the research is pretty promising. They're finding ways to combine those subjective things like how you feel with more objective measures, heart rate, sleep patterns, even facial expressions.
Whoa, facial expressions too. That's getting really advanced.
Technology, right? It's moving fast. But yeah, the idea is to create a much more complete picture of our mental state.
I mean, it's fascinating. But it does make you think, like, who has access to all this data?
Hmm.
And what are they going to do with it?
Totally valid concern. And it's something we definitely need to be talking about more, as this tech gets more sophisticated. We need strong privacy protections, ethical guidelines, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, we don't want to end up in some dystopian future where our own minds are being used against us, right?
Definitely not. But on a more positive note, imagine if we could use this tech for good.
Okay, yes. Let's talk about the good stuff.
Right. Like imagine understanding your own mental health on a whole new level, identifying your triggers, developing personalized coping mechanisms.
So it's like having a therapist in your pocket, basically.
Almost. And while it'll never replace actual human connection or therapy, it could be a powerful tool to supplement those traditional approaches.
Okay, now that's something I can get behind.
Yeah.
So it's not about fearing the tech, but figuring out how to use it in a way that's actually beneficial. Right.
Exactly. It all comes back to that mindfulness we were talking about earlier. Being aware of how this tech makes us feel, using it intentionally, and remembering that we're always in control.
We're the ones in the driver's seat. I love it. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the nitty-gritty of fitness trackers to the mind-blowing possibilities of like mood tracking tech and the future of well-being.
It's been quite the journey.
It has. So to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, take care of those amazing minds and bodies of yours.